And so this is, some of you might have seen some of these before. So we did a series of experiments through the years on mediumship. So this is a recap of everything we've done and the latest on what we've done. The latest is still about 1 year old. And so we have mental experiences throughout the day. And so one might wonder, where do these experiences come from? Do they all come from the brain, or can they come from somewhere else? And we conducted a survey on about 1,200 people. They were all meditators, and we asked them, what do you experience during your meditation? And about half of them, here you see in highlighted red, said, well, I experienced clairvoyance or telepathy, a connection with teacher and guru, etc. So it doesn't mean these experiences are real, but at least half of the people said, I had this at least once during my meditation. And so why study mediumship and channeling from a parapsychology perspective? And from my perspective, I started studying that because it seems like the low-hanging fruit, in a sense that it's easy to find mediums. They're everywhere. You go to a small city, you're going to have people who claim to be mediums. Mediums are easy to study compared to psychics because they try to convince you you're very in contact with your deceased relative. With psychics, they give you prediction about the future that could influence your behavior, and then it's hard to check, etc. With mediums, it's easy. You just ask them, what do you see? And they try to convince you. And also the experiments can be done blinded. Also, this involves extreme emotion, usually associated with death. And if you look at anecdotal reports, this usually association with death or extreme emotion is when people report a paranormal experience. At least that's one of the main cases where they do report this experience. Also, before we started about 10 years ago, there was 2 reputable studies already published on the subject, which you've probably heard about from Gary Schwartz and Ed Kelly at UVA. And here the hypothesis is relatively simple. It's not so much do spirits exist, do you survive after bodily death, is very abnormal phenomena. And we can discuss at length whether this is just super psi or some form of telepathy, or whether this is survival of consciousness. At IONS, we have this complex channeling research program where we investigate channeling and mediumship from different perspectives, like is the content useful, what's literature review, what do we know, what's the characteristics of channeling, what do people experience when they do channeling, how does it work, what makes a channel, and can we verify the information? So here we're really going to look at this specific cell, but we do actually study all of them, and we have paper in all these areas. So if you're interested, go on the IONS website. And so I'm going to show you 3 experiments we did throughout the years. This one is already about 7-year-old. This we did in collaboration with Judy Beischel from the Windbridge Institute. We just asked medium to come to the lab, and we asked them 25 questions. So it was double-blinded in a sense that the person who was asking the question didn't even know the deceased relative, and the only thing they told the medium was, can you tell me something about John? And then there was somebody that wanted the reading about John. And so it started about the meditation, and then they connect with the deceased individual, and then we ask them questions. And the questions are varied. It's about their hair color, their habits, their job, their personality, etc. And then what we also did is for each of the people that wanted a reading, so we sent them the reading that was meant for them, and then we sent them what we call a decoy reading. in which the reading was meant for someone else. And we looked at the difference between their rating of the target versus the decoy. For example, you might have someone who is very gullible, and they are going to say, oh yeah, I'm in contact with my deceased relative. So the advantage of comparing people's response on the target and decoy is that it's very positive about the experience. They're going to be positive throughout for both the target and the decoy. So we can just subtract the two. And what we saw is that all the mediums scored higher for the target than for the decoy when rated by the people who wanted the reading. Now, what's interesting is that we also recorded their brainwaves. And so this is how brainwave look like. And then we look at different frequencies. So for example, this is how we represent brainwaves, and the amplitude here are different. The dots represent scalp channels. And so this is like an elevation map. And when we look at it from the top, this is how it looks like. And this is for every single frequency. So here, for example, if it's for that oscillation, let's say it's alpha. And so when it's blue, it means low amplitude. When it's red, it means high amplitude. And when it's green in the middle, it means medium amplitude. And this is the way we present our EEG data. Then we can also project it on the surface of the scalp. And so what we found interesting is that we took all the questions and then we looked at the brain activity of the medium right before they answered the question. And we divided their brain activity into two classes, the question on which they were correct and the question on which they were not correct. So high performance versus low performance. And we found a difference. This is for one of the medium in a region here, which we call frontal midline theta. We also, this is a 3D representation. So this is a significant difference here. So this is the frontal midline theta region. And this is linked with memory activation. So our interpretation of this data is that the mediums were shutting down their working memory. And so maybe they are more receptive to the outside. And this is just a 3D representation showing this is the same scalp topography except in 3D. What we also did is that instead of just using low performance, high performance, we try to see, does it still work with low performance, medium performance, and high performance? And we seem to have a gradient in the correspondence between spectral power, so the activity in this area, and the accuracy of the response, even when we divide it in three. And we couldn't really divide further because we only had that many questions. In this first experiment, we also compared three mental states. So we asked mediums, please connect with your deceased relative. So that's the mediumship case. Or please do recall. So just remember somebody you know. Or do perception in the sense that you're just listening to a story somebody is reading, or you do fabrication, you just make up somebody. So there are four different mental states, and we ask them to alternate for 1 minute each. So first medium, here the order is random, but first they started with block of mediumship, then a block of recall for 1 minute, then perception for 1 minute, fabrication, and then we repeat that 3 times. And what we found, I'm going to go real quick on these ones because it's a complex slide to explain. It's explained in the paper, but what we found basically is that we found some differences between these different mental states. And the interpretation is that these are indeed different mental states. Most people who believe that these states are not real would say, oh, they're just making up something. So here we showed, well, the brain activation when you make up something is different than the brain activation when you're in mediumship. So this is likely to be a different mental state. And we published a scientific report in the Frontier of Psychology, which got a lot of attention. Here it was in the second percentile of all the article. Search and 5% most viewed article on this journal, Frontier in Psychology. So this was the first one. And this experiment was hard to do, the first one, because we only had 25 questions. And for EEG, you need a lot of data. So you need a lot of data points. So in this second one, we thought, well, we can just show them pictures and then ask them a simple question. And we're just not going to show them like a couple of pictures. We're going to show them hundreds of pictures. And so that's what we did. So we had 12 professional mediums. They came to the lab. They saw 400 pictures each. And each picture were either showing somebody that was deceased or somebody that was still alive. And we collected the brainwaves. We also spent considerable effort to normalize the image in which we centered them. So we had the software where we selected data points, the ears, the top of the head, and the chin. Then we reframed the picture, converted to black and white, and then we had the different software where we indicated whether this person was smiling or not. And then we had 3 judges who would rate whether the person was smiling, the person was not smiling. And eventually, so here's just 100 photo, but there's 200 of each. Really, we had the database of people were alive and people were deceased. And in this database, there were as many people smiling in the alive category as people smiling in the deceased category. They are the same age range, etc. So we also had a version online. So this is a demo of the version running, which asks you for information. So the first step with this was online. Then we tried with 12 mediums. And you had to indicate whether you're a medium or not. Then it's going to load the pictures. And then you're going to have to answer whether you think the person shown is deceased or still alive. So this is the person, this is a movie, a person doing the video. So you see, it can go pretty fast. Here they have 200 pictures. So we used 200 pictures online and 400 pictures in the lab. Some pictures were relatively low resolution, but we made sure that the picture were the same resolution in the alive or deceased category. So after you get to 200 pictures, you're ready to finish 198, 199, 200, and then you get some feedback about your performance. And it tells you if you're above chance expectation or not. This is our result in the lab on 100 participants. And so we found an effect that was above chance expectation, significant, but barely above chance. You see, chance is 50%, we were at 51%. We also had a robot that was randomly clicking. It wasn't a real robot, obviously, it was just a software that was making random choice on the website. And this one was a chance expectation. So this was promising. And this is the result in the lab with the 12 mediums. And you can see that all of them were above chance level, except 2, S1 and S11 and S12 were about 49% out of 50. So the likelihood they would all be above chance expectation is relatively low, is very low. Then we studied their brainwaves and we found early brainwaves, so about 100 milliseconds after presentation, so that's about 1/10 of a second. And the difference between correct and incorrect response for the deceased individual. And we localize that in this parental area. And I'm not going to enter the detail of the interpretation. We were expecting to see difference much later, which would be meaning, which would indicate that the person has consciously perceived the pictures and made a meaningful choice. Here, this difference, if it is reproducible, represents very early visual processing, about 100 milliseconds, so totally unconscious. And we published this paper, and there were resistance in the field in the sense that even after it was published, it was retracted for no apparent reason. So we fought hard to know why they would retract it, and that they give us a reason. We were even planning on taking legal action because we paid to get it published. Eventually, they reimbursed us everything, but it was still retracted. So we republished it a second time in Explore. In the second one, we also added machine learning analysis, showing that machine learning couldn't figure out the right category of image. So one problem with the previous experiment was also that it's very hard to figure out to maintain this database, because unfortunately people die all the time. So you have to update the database. And the people we choose to include were relatively old, so half would be alive, half would be deceased. And also we can never be sure 100% that the people are deceased. So we changed the database, and here we asked the medium, can you figure out the cause of death? Did this person had a heart attack, was there a car accident, and were there shot? And the reason we did this is when we had medium in the lab, some of them said, oh, some clients, they come with us with pictures from the war, and then we can experience how what happened with each person. So this is one reason why you did this experiment. And I'm going to do it with you here real quick. They're going to be 6 images. And so you can try to guess if this person died of a heart attack, car accident, or was shot. Usually when we do that on Zoom, we allow people to vote. There's a voting mechanism on Zoom, and then we report the result. But here we didn't plan it, so we're not going to do that. So first person, car accident, heart attack, or shot. Second person, third person, fourth person, fifth person, and sixth person. And now the results, drum roll. So this was the result. So we made sure, for example, that we also had this software. So we made sure that people in the heart attack category were not obese. We obviously had many more obese people in the heart attack category than in the auto crash and homicide, but we made sure to balance the category in the sense there was no more obese people in the heart attack versus auto crash and homicide. So this is mediumship 3. And here we had 12 mediums and 12 controls, because one criticism of our previous experiment is that people say, well, you haven't demonstrated that mediums are doing better than controls. So we wanted to include controls as well. And the controls we recruited on Craigslist, asking people if they had any experience in mediumship, and they said no. And the mediums we recruited, they were professional mediums from the San Francisco Bay Area. And this, so about 200 pictures from 3 tech categories, and we also collected their brainwave with an upgraded system that's shown here. And these are the results. Where chance here is because there's 3 tech categories of image, so it's about 70%. And so you see, actually, the non-mediums are not doing as well as are doing better than the medium. When we take everybody together, so all the mediums and non-mediums, we have odds against chance in 1 of 41s, which give a p-value of 0.02, two-tailed. And it's more significant when we just take non-mediums, but it's not significant when we just take the mediums. And there's many interpretations why this might be the case. One of them was that we thought mediums were, maybe having performance anxiety, or you could argue maybe this is a statistical oddities, and it might not reproduce. We also look at the brain waves, and we saw interesting difference. So we didn't see any difference between, so we looked at two main peaks, one early one, which was similar to the one we did in the previous experiment, and one later one between 2 and 400 milliseconds. We had different categories, so we couldn't really try to exactly reproduce the peak we observed in the previous experiment. But at this latency, which is the latency at which we observed the peak in the previous experiment, we saw no significant difference. We saw a strong difference in the brain of controls versus mediums. Also, mediums were taking much longer to respond. So maybe they were overthinking the response. They were taking about 1 second longer to respond. So we published these results in journal Brain and Cognition, and it has already gotten some attention. So this is the summary of our effort on mediumship accuracy at ions, and yeah, that's the gist of it and the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Arnaud. So I'll take a look at the questions now. So, and if anybody has any other questions, please put them in the chat. Let me go back up here and see. All right. So one question came in, and I guess when the mediums were making a choice, did they have only 8 seconds? That's compared to, I guess, the online version.
Yeah. So so the time they had to answer. So in some pilots, we only gave them 5 seconds, and it wasn't enough. And then we increased it to 10 seconds. And then it was moving on to the next picture if the person was editing too much. I don't know if it was 10 or 15 seconds, but we made it much longer because medium complaint is too short. Obviously, it was just during the pilot, during the experiment, everybody had the same experience. So yeah, there's the question: how long, is good enough? Our main concern here is that if we show the image too long, we won't be able to show as many images. And we really want to. The main reason we did it with images is we wanted the statistical power. So we wanted to use a lot of images. This way we could run some powerful statistics. Like if you have 5 images with low numbers, there's always a chance that people will guess all 5 correctly. But if you have 400 images, it's very unlikely they're going to guess the 400 perfectly. So we can.
Did the mediums say anything about the photographic test versus actually trying to connect with them? So in other words, I've known mediums who could not tell from a photograph necessarily unless they spent a little time trying to connect with that person.
Yeah, we tried to collect data from medium. We said they could do that based on photographs, and most of them reported connecting with the person and afterwards reporting. The problem that might be in the later experiments, so in the first, where we asked the cause of death, they said, oh, I feel something in my chest, well, could be a heart attack, could be a gunshot, could be a car accident.
Right.
So maybe, the categories we choose were not ideal in that sense, but also we do what we could. We had a very good database of public servant, policemen who served and died in service, and so they set up a database. And of course, we haven't released any of this publicly. So I mean, we completely respect these officers, and but it's very detailed. Everything that happened. Unfortunately, there are very few, fortunately for the officers, there are very few deaths outside of these 3 categories. There's a few people that died of drowning, but yeah, other than that, there was just a few people in each category. So these were the only one where we could get image, even though we had 20,000 officers in the database. We could only get, once we did our stringent image selection, like we didn't want any hat, we didn't want any of these things. We wanted to balance the body weight, the smile, etc., across all the categories. We also applied machine learning, something I didn't show here, and on all the characteristics we collected, and this system, this artificial intelligence system, was not able to tell between the different categories. So yeah, we did what we could.
All right, so here's a question, actually a two-part question. Why is the chance hit rate 2 out of 3 rather than 1 out of 3?
Yeah, it depends how you look at it. I mean, it's 2 out of 3 of making a mistake, or 1 out of 3 of being correct. So yeah, it's the same.
Okay, and the second part is, if you can define a chance hit rate, why don't you capitalize on the difference between the hit rate and chance rather than the difference between mediums and controls?
Yeah, we did both. So we looked at everybody together, are they above chance expectation? Or we look also at medium versus control, or we look, are mediums above chance expectation, or control above chance expectation? So we did all of these possible analysis. And the take-home message is that when we take all the people we tested, that we group them together, we do find significant results. Although, I mean, it's only p equals 0.02, but for psychology, this is still very relevant. When we take the medium only, it's not significant. But when we take, there's a small trend though. When we take the control only, it's very significant.
So this is a comment on that. If the non-mediums, the control people, were psychic, they might have had just as good or better scores than the mediums.
Yeah, and that's always, how can you find, people who were not psychic? Actually, we have encountered this problem, not in this specifically in this experiment, but in other experiments where we were recruiting people we never had experiment, and we had such a hard time because everybody has had, at least once these experiments. So it's very hard to find people we never had this experience.
All right. Were there any differences in the DMN between mediums and controls, and correct versus incorrect responses?
So the DMN is more linked. I mean, so we didn't look at the DMN. I'm not sure it would be relevant here. It's for congruent versus non-congruent. Here, everything is congruent in the sense we just ask them a question. It's just a simple categorization task. So yeah, I don't think that I don't think this was relevant to this specific experiment.
Okay. On the alive.
Yeah, what I wanted to say as well is we did look. So we had overall it was significant, and so we did look. Well, is it more the image of car accident? Is it more the image of gunshots? So and we didn't find any difference between the category of images, which from our perspective is good because it means that there was not a strong bias. For example, if we had a strong bias for a heart attack, then it could have been an indication, well, we didn't do our randomization well enough, preparation of image. So we had, people could tell from the facial characteristics that, these people were more likely to have a heart attack in the future, which has been shown in the literature. By the way, you can, if you see pictures of people, you can say well above chance if you're a smoker or not, and also if they could die of a heart attack or not. So we did a good job. it doesn't mean that mediums and controls couldn't look at the image and try to use the facial characteristics to guess. For example, you could say, well, the people who died of gunshot were more impulsive, so maybe there's facial characteristics of impulsiveness, and we can't possibly control with that, so we can't remove the classical interpretation. We can just say it's more likely that this is like this, or this is this way. Same for our previous experiment with live and deceased individual. There might be facial characteristics that indicate that you would die younger. So even though all the pictures we took were from the 1960s, so where people were at the end of high school, and then it was 50 years later, so about half of them were deceased already. It could be that when you're 20, you have facial characteristics that would be predictive of you dying younger than older.
Okay. Well, kind of on the alive and dead test as compared to the cause of death test, what's your reaction to the thesis that mediumship inherently sensitizes someone to the deceased more so than the cause of death for someone known to be deceased?
Yeah, so of course, in our experiment, it was hard to replicate a real reading. And so, the human connection between the medium and the person who is receiving the reading, it was completely double blind. And we had, in the first experiment, we had someone on the other side that wanted the reading about John. But in the second and third experiment, we had basically no one. These were people we didn't know. They were former police officers, and so that's a potential problem with this design. So, I mean, even if we had found no effect whatsoever, I don't think we should necessarily invalidate, mediumship or channeling, saying that, there can't be any effect.
Okay, I have one last question. So if anybody else has any questions, please put them in the chat. Was the displacement effect considered in the experiment?
What's the displacement effect?
Where someone, when they make a guess, it actually refers to the next target that's coming up or the previous target.
So we haven't tested that. We didn't test that specifically. We've released at least the data from experiment 3 on the internet, so people can just download the data, check for themselves, whether this happened or not. Yeah, it's totally possible. There's effect we missed.
All right. Does anyone else have a question for Arnaud? So what's your next step?
Our next step, well, right now we're taking a pause, but our next step is more to pause on mediumship. So,
right.
But one next step is to do massive online experiment to find talents. Instead of focusing on the general population, we want to test talents. And this has been done before. We're just giving it another shot. So we have the chance of having this website, which we inherited from the Integral Institute, that's called God's Eye, that Dean has talked about. So 300, I think there's 300,000 people were on the website and contributed. 250,000 people contribute 300 million trials. So we have this, so we're redoing that, and we're trying to find talent in that pool of people. So that's the goal right now. And one of the tests on the talent might be one of mediumship.
That's great. It sounds like a great idea. All right. If no one else has any questions, we can give people back a couple extra minutes, give you back about 5 extra minutes here, Arnaud. And you have anything else you want to say or add?
I mean, so we contacted people, if you want to reproduce the experiments, we're totally open with sharing the pictures. We try to run it online, and we asked the people who were handling the police databases that would be okay with them, and they said no. So we backed off. but it's fine to share the pictures for research purposes. So I think if any of you is interested in running this experiment, we can share our presentation script and the image we use so you can run it in the lab, in your labs. And I know that Chris Rowe was interested, I think was interested in doing that in the UK at some point. So if you're interested in that, just let us know. And then you don't need the EEG. You can just run it as a psychophysics task. You don't have to record the EEG necessarily.
All right, we actually just got another question. So were any of the analyses pre-planned?
So there were, we didn't, if what you mean, we didn't pre-register them. But, you know, these were BL proposal. So we did, in our BL proposal, we did indicate how we would process the data. I think what was left most to open was the brain, the signal analysis, because it really depends on the task. In terms of the behavior, it's very straightforward. Are they both chance or not? Are they both chance for each category or medium different from controls? So this was pretty much pre-planned. The brain analysis was a little bit more exploratory based on the tools which were available at the time for running statistical analysis. So no, this wasn't pre-registered. Yes, it was somewhat pre-planned.
All right, thank you, Arnaud.